What's happening in the country right now is we've dislocated the political class from the people that they're supposed to be serving, and we've skewed the policy decisions away from the people. He is not running in 2028. There's no way that's going to happen. You can hold me to that. He's not running because the Republicans don't want him to run. The Supreme Court doesn't want him to run. The Democrats certainly don't want him to run. There's a lot of young Republicans, when they're getting ready in the morning and they look in the mirror, they see the 48th president. And they don't see Donald Trump. They see themselves. They're going to want to clear him out of there. There's going to be an ideological civil war in that party, that MAGA party, because Donald Trump is not going to be the leader of the party. Guess what happens? When you have a personality cult around a person, the other people can't hold the coalition together. And that goes on in our country, right? And we got to figure out a way to stop it. And I think the only way to stop it is to take a platform and to speak about it honestly to the American people and explain to them what's going on. And I'm going to start with a personal story and then talk a little bit about the U.S. and where the U.S. is and where I think it's going. But I want to start with a personal story because it is tied into investing, and it's about keeping your ego in check and watching your pride. And so these are two things I did not do well in the Trump campaign and going into work for Donald Trump. So let me set the scene for you. It's November the 8th, 2016. It's 6 p.m. I'm at Trump Tower. I'm on the 24th floor. That's where Donald Trump had his office. I peeked into his office. He looked at me and said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, well, it was election night, by the way. So I said, what am I doing tomorrow? I don't know. What are you doing tomorrow? And he looked at me and said, well, I'm flying to Scotland. I'm moving my plane from LaGuardia Airport. I'm fueling it right now. You can't leave internationally from LaGuardia. You have to go to JFK. So I'm moving the plane to JFK. I'm flying to Scotland. I'm going to be there for 9 days. And this was the exact quote. And watch the hand movement. Is it the hand movement? Okay. Let her have her day in the sun. 6 p.m., November the 8th, 2016. By 3 a.m., Wednesday, November the 9th, he was the president-elect of the United States, and we were all standing with him, helping him put his speech together. 5 days later, I was named to the executive transition team, and you probably know this anyway, but I'll repeat it. We were in disarray. We had no idea what we were going to do, and none of us focused on the transition because none of us thought he was winning, including the president-elect. And so now we've got to build a cabinet, we've got to build a sub-cabinet, and we're working very hard to put this thing together for the inauguration. And I was asked by the president to take a job inside the White House, but there was a gentleman by the name of Reince Priebus. He didn't really like me very much, and I said, listen, it'd be better off for you, not for me and Reince Priebus to be bucking heads, in the early part of your term. But if things change, you ever want to get rid of Priebus, give me a call. I mean, I've made some stupid decisions in my life, but we're getting into the biggest stupid one. He calls me on the 20th of July, 2017, and says, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, you're the president. I mean, I'm doing whatever you tell me to do. Okay, come down to the White House, have lunch with me in the study off the Oval Office. And so there I was, 12 noon, July 20th. It was a Thursday. And at 10 a.m. on July 21st, I've named the White House communications director. Now, my wife did not want me to do that. And be very candid with this group here. My wife hates Donald Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. I'm talking about the hatred like this. You've never seen hate. It's like an Eastern European kind of like permanent hatred. And you know what I'm talking about. And so she was like, you should not do this. This is going to be a horrific mistake. But I didn't listen to her. And what I did, and you can never do this as an investor, by the way, what I did is I took a round peg and tried to force it into a square hole, and I went to go work for the president. And it started out, and it went badly from the beginning, guys. My press conference that I did on that Friday, I thought it went well. The president didn't like it. I guess I talked for too long. Even J.D. Vance today jokes about that. If you're talking in front of the president, you only can talk for 30 seconds. He gets annoyed after that. And it was going downhill for me the whole time. And then this happened on a Friday, and the reason I know it happened on a Friday is I was only there for 2 Fridays, so I know it would happen on a Friday. And there I was, I'm in the cabinet room, and we get into this fight. It turns out that I was right on the point, which was even worse for me, because if you're right on the point and you're with Donald Trump, you are absolutely wrong. He has to be right on every point. and he told Jared Kushner that I embarrassed him in the cabinet room, and he was going to fire me. And Kushner called me and said, look, he's hot-headed. If you can make it to the end of the weekend, that was a Friday, if you can make it till Monday, you're going to be okay. So now I'm going to tell you how I knew I got fired, ladies and gentlemen. The White House issues you this encrypted bat phone. It's an iPhone, but it's got all of this extra spyware and all this attack technology in it. And you're told when you get to the White House, here's your bat phone, only communicate with staff and cabinet members from the bat phone. Of course, Pete Hegseth didn't get the message, he was using WhatsApp and Signal, but I'm trying to use the bat phone. At 6 a.m. in the morning, I turn the phone on. It's Monday morning, the 31st of July. And I turn the phone on. Phone's not working. I can't make a call out. I'm not getting any text messages in. I'm like, oh no, I'm getting fired today. And so by 9:30 in the morning, I'm fired by General Kelly. I leave the White House at about 3 o'clock. And I'm going to lay out for you the things I learned in that experience. Number one, it was the worst experience of my life professionally. It's pretty obvious to everybody. Just imagine this. You're fired from the White House. You're blown through the door into Pennsylvania Avenue. You're skinned alive by the media. And then you're rolled in like margarita salt by late-night comedians. I heard it all. I was Tony Soprano on the Potomac. I was a Jersey Shore cast member. It was a lot worse than that. But I'm just giving you the lowlights of it. But anyway, there I am dealing with and faced with how am I going to rebuild my career, rebuild my reputation, where am I going? And I'm going to leave you with three things, and I want to talk a little bit about the country. So thing number one is do not put your pride and your ego into your decision making. And so there I was. I grew up in a blue-collar family. I went to Tufts and Harvard Law School. I'd worked at Goldman. I built 2 successful hedge fund businesses. I've got the chance to work for the American president, even though it was probably not the right thing to do. I talked myself into it for pride, and I talked myself into it for ego purposes, and it ended very, very badly. And I know if you're being honest with yourself in this room, you may have done that as an investor. You may have done that in a personal relationship. Take your pride and ego out of your decision making. That's learning lesson number one. Learning lesson number two, when you're going through something like that, and that was arguably the most difficult time in my life, but there was an added element to this, and it's always uncomfortable for me to share this, but I'm going to share it with everybody. My wife and I were fighting. She filed for divorce on me, which was somewhat justifiable if you knew the whole backstory. And on the 24th of July, when I was in the White House working for President Trump, she gave birth to our son, James, and I missed the birth of my son. Where was I? I was with Donald Trump and the president's entourage on Air Force One. We had landed the plane in West Virginia, and he was making a speech to the Boy Scout summer camp, and we were 60 miles away from the plane, and there's a 125-mile no-fly zone around Air Force One, so it was impossible for me to get back to New York. So I want to take you through it. Ready? Fired after 11 days, divorce filing, missed the birth of my son. So listen, if you're ever having a bad day and it's not cancer, call me. I'm going to make you feel a lot better, okay? And so what I did was I pulled myself together. I had this PR guy say to me, listen, you should, you're a pretty wealthy guy. You should go buy yourself a villa in Italy, and you should go to Italy and stay there for 5 years. Come back sometime in 2022. This will probably be all over by then, and even then you probably won't survive it, okay? So learning lesson number two, don't do that, but go straight at the problem. And so what did I do? I went on Steve Colbert. I went on Jimmy Kimmel. I was reading mean tweets. It was rough, man. There were some really bad tweets about me. I was reading them on Jimmy Kimmel. I went on the Bill Maher show, and I faced the music. So number two, when you have a disastrous situation like that, face the music, go towards the problem, not away from it. And then the third thing, which is very meaningful to me and meaningful to my family and meaningful to my children and my wife, don't make your relationships in life disposable. And so we were fighting, the divorce was filed, and we reached the moment of reconciliation. It's 8 years later, and I would make the argument that our relationship now is stronger than ever before, but it could have gone one way or the other. So just think about that in your personal relationships and in your life, about your pride, I had to swallow my pride in those moments and see if we could make that reconnection. And it was very valuable to me and very valuable to my children. So those are the 3 lessons from this unbelievably tough experience that I had. And if you had asked me the question, I know I'm not allowed to take questions today, but if you asked me the question, what was the worst decision that you made and what was the biggest mistake that you made professionally, I would respond very plaintively and say, working for Donald Trump was the biggest mistake. But underlying that mistake, and of course I didn't know that at the time, but underlying that mistake, there was a silver lining. And think about that in your life, because something could go wrong for you or something could go in a way that you're not anticipating, but it actually turns out it may be more beneficial, because the humbling experience of that firing probably made me more empathetic, probably made me more psychologically minded. But what it accidentally did for me is it gave me a platform to talk about the problems and to talk about what I saw. And so I stayed loyal to the president for about 2 years. I thought it would have been inappropriate. I've been fired. I saw some crazy things in the White House. I said, it's going to be inappropriate for me to break from him, so I didn't. And I tried to stay loyal to him. I was on the Bill Maher show in August of 2019. Bill looks at me. I'm defending the president, defending him on different things. I'm a lifelong Republican. He looks at me and he says to me, well, what about the women in the squad? Now, you may or may not know who they are, as I'll explain it quickly. There are 4 women congressmen. They're Democrats. They're sort of left-leaning by the standards of America, sort of on the left side of the aisle. 3 are African-American, 1 is Hispanic-American. And the president put out a tweet in August of 2019 that these 4 women should go back to the countries they originally came from. Problem is, 3 of them were born in the United States, and 1 was a naturalized citizen. But this was American nativism, and this is a form of racism in our country. And so Bill turns to me, yeah, you defended Donald Trump, but what about this comment, and what do you think of it? Live television. I said, look, I don't like it. I said, my grandmother is Italian-American. My grandfather, they came from Italy in the 1920s. They were told to go back to the country they originally came from, and I don't like the comment. And I wish, he's the president of the United States, I wish he wouldn't talk like that. Well, Stormy Daniels was on the show with us. You think the president was watching that show? So now we're in the after party, and Stormy's there, and she's giving me somewhat graphic and horrific information about Donald Trump, not appropriate for this audience, and I'm listening. And I'm with Bill Maher, and he looks at me, he says, you're dead tomorrow. I said, I'm dead tomorrow? He says, what do you mean? Trump's going to light you up on Twitter. He's going to destroy you tomorrow. I said, well, why would he do that? I was out there defending him. No. You were 7 for 8 for Donald Trump on my show. You got to go 13 for 10 for Donald Trump. You were 7 for 8. He's going to light you up tomorrow. I bet him dinner. And of course, I lost the bet. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he is lighting me up like a Roman candle. And I will tell you something, again, very frankly, I was unnerved by it. I was like, oh my God, he's got 150 million Twitter followers today, but he had 80 million Twitter followers. He's the president of the United States. He's like lighting me up on Twitter. He's cyberbullying me. And so I'm looking at this thing, and I got to now make a decision. And I'm a New Yorker, as was evidenced from this promo video that I'll be showing in my house every morning when I wake up. And I said, I got to fight back like a New Yorker. So I wrote back to him. I said, so said the fattest president since William Howard Taft, just to light him up a little bit, right? He came back at me, and then I said, you're getting old, you're not trolling properly, try again. And it got really bad after that, and then the fight really started. And so I'm bringing this up for a reason, because nobody's safe in his perimeter. Doesn't matter how much money you gave him, how hard you worked for him, what you contributed to him. It doesn't matter. None of the guys are safe. It's just the way it goes. But what's happened, ladies and gentlemen, is he is a sign, he's a symptom of what's actually going on in the country. I can't speak for Australia, but I'm going to tell you a quick story about America. And again, this story doesn't necessarily reflect well on me, but it's worth telling. I went with Donald Trump in May of 2016 to Albuquerque, New Mexico for a campaign rally. And there were 9,000 people waiting for him. And I'm a curious person, so I took the security badge off, and I got down in front, and I walk the crowd, and I ask people questions. Where are you here? What are you doing here? And I'm going to give you a composite of what was said. This one young man, he was in his mid-30s, he said, Anthony, I worked at this factory for 12 years. My dad was there for 30, he got his pension. I didn't get mine. They let us both go. I'm working at Domino's Pizza, delivering pizza. I'm working at Lowe's, the home improvement supply company. My income's down about 50%, and I've got 2 jobs. And I'm here because Mr. Trump says he's going to bring the jobs back. And of course, I saw him on The Apprentice, and I believe him. By the way, you think you're in New Mexico. You know what the joke is around here? I said, what's the joke? He says, well, New Mexico? That would be Mexico, because that's where the factory moved, across the border for lower cost labor. And if you really study U.S. economics, from 1993, when we signed NAFTA, to 2016, the moment of that conversation, we lost 65,000 factories in the United States. And we turned a group of people like my father. I lost my dad 2 years ago. He's a very hardworking man, but he's a blue-collar guy. He was a crane operator, and he was an hourly worker on Long Island, but he got enough of a middle-class wage where we had a single-family house. We went to a reasonably good public school system, and I would describe the family I grew up in as a working-class, economically aspirational family. But in 35 years, ladies and gentlemen, because of the structural dynamics of globalization and some bad policy decisions, we turned a group of people that were economically aspirational, and we turned them into economically desperational people. And I missed it. And I'm always a little sore at myself, and it doesn't reflect well on me that I missed it, but let me explain to you how I missed it. I went to Tufts, I went to Harvard, I went to Goldman, I started hanging out in the salons of the wealthy, and what happens is you get the collective biases of the people around you. So again, when you think like an investor, keep your ego out of it, keep your pride out of it, but also watch the collective biases that you're living in, because I was absorbed in a group of people thinking about the country a certain way, which was very disconnected from the people that were working for a living as laborers and people that were working as hourly people. I remember getting back on the plane with the president, and he wasn't the president at that time, he was a candidate, and I looked at my phone, I downloaded my dad's union website, I got the wages, the hourly wages for an operating engineer or a crane operator on Long Island, and I turned to Mr. Trump, I said, the wages for this very same job are down 26.5% in terms of purchasing power today. So that puts that family, the one I grew up in, not in a single-family home. It puts us in a rental apartment, likely. Maybe we've got some food stamp support from the government. You go from being middle class to lower middle class, or almost close to the poverty line. And this happened in our country. Again, I can't speak for Australia, but this very large group of people in the country felt there was a vacuum of advocacy for them. And again, you can like him or dislike him, but he saw it. He had very, very good political instinct. Here's a guy that was living in a triplex apartment adjacent to the Tiffany store on Fifth Avenue. And if you ever went into this apartment, it looked like Louis XIV smoked crystal meth and decorated the apartment. You never seen anything like this. You had to wear sunglasses in there. Like, how can anybody live in this thing? Okay, and he's doing that, of course. He's Liberaceizing the Oval Office right now as we're talking. But he saw it. Jeb Bush didn't see it. I didn't see it. But I think it's very, very important to understand, if you want to understand where America is right now, there's a very large group of people that feel left out. And he may not be supplying them with the right policy answers. He perhaps isn't doing that. In fact, empirically, I could probably make that argument. But you know what he is doing? He's providing an outlet for their anger. He is like an orange wrecking ball that is smashing into the establishment. And they like that because their attitude is, hey, if this isn't working for me, I certainly don't want it to work for you. And this is the sort of anger-based politics and the divide in the country. Concomitant to that, and equally important, we have structurally changed the way these politicians operate. And I'm going to take you guys back to 1992 the Ross Perot election. I call it that because George Herbert Walker Bush, the incumbent president, was running against the Democratic nominee, but also the reform candidate. So he was running against Bill Clinton, and he was running against Ross Perot. And Ross Perot scared the daylights. He scared the daylights out of the two parties. How did he do that? He got 19.9% of the vote. These two parties looked at each other and said, oh my God, we got to strengthen the duopoly. Unlike Australia, the UK, where there's different parties, we got to keep this two-party system going together because it's structurally good for us to stay in power. And so they created all these procedural mechanisms to make it nearly impossible for a third party to develop. So much so that in the year 2000, Donald Trump looked at running as a Reform Party candidate, and he looked at the math. He said, okay, it's impossible. I'm never going to get there. So he did something that none of us really understood at the time that he did it. He was in a third party. I call that third party MAGA. But he did an M&A transaction with one of the traditional parties, the Republican Party. He decapitated that party and installed his team into that party. They call themselves Republicans, but it's really not the traditional Republicans. It's more of a populist nationalism. But this two-party system has made it impossible for reform and is impossible for independent discussion. Incidental to that, we have something in our country called gerrymandering, which I can't possibly imagine you could have it in your country. But what is gerrymandering? These politicians can redistrict their congressional districts pursuant to who likes them and who doesn't. And so, everybody's got cookies on their phone, and they got cookies in their laptops and their hardtop computers, and they can figure out if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. And if you're with the elected leader, they'll carve you into their district. And if you're not with the elected leader, they'll carve you out of the district. And it's sort of a bizarre thing that's happened. But when I was a kid, if you looked at a congressional district, it looked like a geometric shape you could recognize from geometry. But now it looks like these jagged edge jigsaw puzzles. And so I submit to you rhetorically the following question. Are we in a real democracy where the politicians are picking the voters? Because the voters in the United States, at least in the House of Representatives, are no longer picking the politicians. The districts are being decided by these guys, and they are going hard at each other now in a way that's very reckless. Trump called the governor of Texas. Looks like I'm going to lose the House. There are 5 congressional districts here. Gerrymander those districts, make the Republicans win. Gavin Newsom saying, oh, you're going to do that? Okay, fine. I'm going to do that it's an arms race of gerrymandering. I'm going to do that in California. So I just want you to think about this for a second. Step back. Let's say California, Governor Schwarzenegger said last week that there's about 40% of California is actually Republican. But yet if you look at the House of Representatives, 80% of the members of the House of Representatives that represent California are Democrats. So 20% of those people have actually lost some level of representation as a result of gerrymandering. This has happened in our country. It's made it very, very hard for new people. It's very, very hard for new ideas. Said differently, let me give you the math. The Congress has a 14% approval rating in the U.S. I mean, that's slightly above Kim Il-jung, the North Korean dictator, just slightly, okay? And yet, 95% of the time, the incumbent gets reelected. Second thing that's happening, very, very big structural problem for the United States. Again, it doesn't happen any of the other Western democracies, is the money. It's a very famous Supreme Court case, at least in the U.S., called Citizens United. And in that case, which was rendered in January of 2010, Justice Scalia got together with the majority. He wrote for the majority, and he said, listen, if you got money, you have a First Amendment right. You can put all your money into a political action committee. You can take political action. Is it a policy initiative? No problem. You can pump $1 billion into it. Is it a candidate? No problem. This is what you have to do. This is the exercise of your First Amendment right. Now, I didn't bring slides. I didn't want to bore you guys, but I want you to imagine a slide that is the congressional agenda, the legislative agenda since January of 2010 to today. And you know what happened? Exactly what you would predict would happen. The money went into the system, billions of dollars. And the legislative agenda became big business, big pharma, tax cuts for the rich, corporate welfare, government bailouts of the banks. It kept moving away from the average person. The big, beautiful spending bill, you've probably read about it here in Australia. The Trump team passed that, had a 38% approval rating when it passed. Now people understand what's in the bill. 22 million people are going to lose their health care. 22 million people off the health care rolls in the U.S. The bill went from 38% approval to 32%, and it's trending down, but they passed it anyway. If you really understood the bill, if you made $50,000 or less, guess what? You lost $700 of benefits, and you're likely, if you're at the low end, you're going to lose your health care on top of that. If you made $1 million or more, ladies and gentlemen, you got a $7,000 benefit from that bill. So what's happening in the country right now is we've dislocated the political class from the people that they're supposed to be serving, and we've skewed the policy decisions away from the people. We've done it even in our food. We like in our own country, particularly in democracy, we like picking on our government. And I understand that, but I don't live here. But I could tell you when I come down here, I appreciate the process that you have in your democracy. The compulsory voting probably eliminates some of the tribalism. The decision-making on, like, the guns, as an example, was a very big, great, in my opinion, policy decision by your country. But think about this. We put fertilizer in our cereal. We put food dyes in our food. What happens is the lobbyist for the food company says, look, we need longer shelf life, cheaper food, and we need to make more money. And the congressional leader says, okay, what do you want? And the lobbyist writes the bill, they write the check, and it goes into the bill, and our kids suffer. And that goes on in our country, right? And we got to figure out a way to stop it. And I think the only way to stop it is to take a platform and to speak about it honestly to the American people and explain to them what's going on. So I've got a few minutes. So I'm going to offer a few suggestions. And I'm going to frame it from a constitutional perspective. U.S. Constitution ratified in 1789. It's a 236-year-old document. But that document was supposed to be a living document, meaning it was going to be amended pursuant to what was going on generationally in the country. You know, we had some good amendments. We've had some bad amendments. One of the bad amendments was we eliminated alcoholic consumption in the country. We had something called prohibition. 11 or so short years later, we had another amendment to eliminate that amendment, put back the ability to consume alcohol in the country. We've had various amendments. A good amendment, we eliminated slavery. That was a very good amendment. The 1965 Civil Rights Act made it a fairer process for African Americans to vote. A lot of African Americans wouldn't show up at the polling, fearful of being lynched. They were fearful of repercussions or retribution against them, and so we tried to clear that up. We tried to make it safer for them to vote. 27 amendments over 236 years. Yet, no amendments since 1993. The 27th Amendment was in 93. It was a procedural amendment, by the way, and there was no amendment of any consequence to that Constitution in the last 59 years. That last amendment was the 26th Amendment, which was the Civil Rights Voting Law. So what's happened, guys, is they tightened the duopoly. They put in the elements of the gerrymandering, and they're like, okay, this works for us, and it works for big business, and we stay in power. I mean, this guy like Chuck Grassley, I think he's like George Washington's great-grandfather or some shit like that. I mean, this guy, he's in office forever, and he's not leaving. He's 92. He wants to run for re-election. And this is what's going on in the country. So I have been out there talking about this issue. And I've been telling people we need a couple of constitutional amendments. I'd love to see compulsory voting. The politicians would never allow that because that would really disrupt them. But two amendments that I think we need is, one is to end the gerrymandering. Let's use AI, or let's use some fair process that's impartial And let's make those congressional districts look more normal and look more proportionately representatives. And then the second thing is we have to reform the money that goes into the system. Because if you don't reform the money is going to continue to run the system. And the people that I described to you in New Mexico are not just in New Mexico, guys. They're all over the country. And you will see a greater rise in populism. You will see a greater rise in anger-based policy, anger-based politics. You know, everybody talks about Zoran Mandami. I'm from New York. There's nonsense that people are leaving New York because of his election. I don't believe that, and you shouldn't believe that. And I'm certainly not going to leave New York. But he won because there's an affordability crisis going on in the country. The baby boomers that have run the country have mismanaged the country. They've mismanaged the treasure of the country. They overspent, they undertaxed. You know this. There's economists in this room. There's hedge fund managers in this room. Milton Friedman once said, if you are going to run a deficit, no problem. That's unfunded tax liability. You're not getting a free lunch. Run the deficit. Don't pay it. You're going to monetize the debt. You're going to use the most pernicious, most regressive form of taxation. You're going to use inflation. And the inflation is going to eat the people alive that have no assets. Because hopefully, in this room, you're in the money management business, or you have some level of affluence, and I hope everybody in the room does. You have assets that can help hedge you against the inflation. But what about my dad? You paid my dad for the hours that he worked on that crane. Let's say you gave him $1,000 and you had 8% inflation. You just took 8% of his life away. Since January of 2020, the U.S. dollar has lost 28% of its value. And if you don't believe me, go to truflation.com, truflation.com. Take a look at what I'm saying. You'll verify what I'm saying. It's okay. Your house went up in value. Maybe your assets went up in value. Maybe your AI stock went up in value. But if you didn't own assets during that period of time, you lost purchasing power. And you're in a personal crisis, and you're super upset about the politicians, and you've got people like Zoran Mandani that are coming into the game and they're speaking to you, and you're going to vote for those people. Now, I hope he's successful. A lot of the things that he's talking about look like they're very much so not going to be a success. But he's the mayor now, or he's going to be the mayor in January. I want him to be successful. But I'm pointing out to you that we have a severe structural problem in the country that has to be addressed. And if we don't address it, it's going to get worse, guys. And so I want to leave you with a note of optimism in the last few minutes, because that sounded pretty dire. I'm going to leave you, I know you're laughing at that because it's actually true, right? I mean, that's the problem with it, right? I mean, you know, I'm sounding dire, but I want to leave you with a note of optimism. What has happened in the country for 250 years, we get a crisis, then we get a reflection on the crisis, and then we get a renewal. And so I got to make a prediction here. I think the weirdest thing about the rise of Trumpism, and think about this, and again, you can like him or dislike him, but he has cast a shadow on American politics for the last decade. And he's certainly been the most prominent American figure, if not global figure, in the last 25 years in terms of the way he's handled things. But I think when you talk to the politicians and they run their public lives based on fear, they're afraid of him. They won't talk out against them. Don't want to get primary to the right. They don't want his money from his political action committee to be spent against them. But when you talk to them privately, they're like, yeah, well, this is going to end shortly. So I'm going to leave you with 3 predictions and then 30 seconds of optimism. Prediction number 1, he is not running in 2028. Okay, there's no way that's going to happen. You can hold me to that. Maybe Richard will invite me back next year. We'll see what happens. But he's not running because the Republicans don't want him to run. The Supreme Court doesn't want him to run. The Democrats certainly don't want him to run. And there's a lot of young Republicans, when they're getting ready in the morning and they look in the mirror, they see the 48th president. And they don't see Donald Trump. They see themselves. And so they're going to want to clear him out of there. Prediction number 2, and I think this is also an important prediction, there's going to be an ideological civil war in that party, that MAGA party. because Donald Trump is not going to be the leader of the party. Guess what happens? When you have a personality cult around a person, the other people can't hold the coalition together. And let me give you evidence. J.D. Vance was getting excoriated in the Congress, in the Senate last week, about Argentinian beef being imported to the country, very low tariffs, and beating up on our cattle farmers. They would never talk like that to Donald Trump. They're talking like that to him. Third prediction, Rubio and Vance will never be president of the United States. And I'll put my money on that because they're too close to Trump. And he eats his young, ladies and gentlemen, trust me. Okay? And he's a Shakespearean Macbeth-like figure. If you ever saw the movie Fargo, those guys are going in the wood chipper. Okay? Now, you don't believe me. You don't believe me, but they will. You're going to be looking back in this and say, wow, Anthony was right. Because he hates... By the way, if you think those guys are going to be president, call Mike Pence. Ask Mike Pence how his political career is going, having been Trump's vice president. But I'll leave you with this one thought. The country, smartest people in the country are looking at what has happened, and they're talking to each other privately and saying there's a deep need for reform here. And I do think that that's going to happen, and I want to leave you with that thought, and I want to thank you guys very much for bringing me down here to speak to you. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.